Right, let's go to the big news in South Africa. Yesterday, there's been mixed reactions in the country after former President Jacob Zuma received a 15-month jail term after being found guilty of contempt of court. Now, Zuma was sentenced yesterday after he failed to appear before the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector in February this year.
Now, his defiance came despite a constitutional court order for him not to go before the commission. Now, supporters of the former president have said the judgment is unacceptable and even unconstitutional. Now, the country's struggle veterans have said that they will protect Zuma from arrest. But a cohort of citizens have welcomed the judgment, saying it showed that all are equal before the constitution and the law.
All right, let's take you to that moment yesterday in South Africa where the ruling was delivered against Jacob Zuma.
In the final analysis, the Constitutional Court makes the following order. 1, the application for direct access is granted. 2, the Helen Suzman Foundation is admitted as amicus curiae. 3, it is declared that Mr. Jacob Zuma is guilty of the crime of contempt of court for failure to comply with the order made by this court in Secretary of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, versus Jacob Zuma. Mr. Jacob Zuma is sentenced to undergo 15 months imprisonment. 5, Mr. Jacob Zuma is ordered to submit himself to the South African Police at Nkandla Police Station or Johannesburg Central Police Station within 5 calendar days from the date of this order for the station commander or other officer in charge of that police station to ensure that he is immediately delivered to a correctional center to commence serving the sentence imposed in paragraph 4. 6, in the event that Mr. Jacob Zuma does not submit himself to the South African Police Service as required by paragraph 5, the Minister of Police and the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service must, within 3 calendar days of the expiry of the period stipulated in paragraph 5, take all steps that are necessary and permissible in law to ensure that Mr. Jacob Zuma is delivered to a correctional center in order to commence serving the sentence imposed in paragraph 4.
Right, so there you heard it first. Jacob Zuma is sentenced to 15 months in prison for contempt of court. So he's got 5 days to submit himself to the police. Well, clock is ticking as it may. Well, joining us this morning to really look at this is political analyst Tessa Dooms to unpack some of the reactions in South Africa following this ruling yesterday. Tessa, good morning. Welcome to Breakfast Central.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, Tessa. Now, tell us generally, what's the sentiment among the citizenry about this sentence that's been handed down to a former president, first of its kind in South Africa?
Yeah, as expected, given the nature of Jacob Zuma's not only his time as president in the country, but even the subsequent years, this is a divisive verdict, and it's a divisive moment in our country. You have not only internal party political factions that emerged from the ANC starting as far back as 2017, when President Cyril Ramaphosa emerged as the ANC president over who was the former president's preferred candidate, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the time. And so from that point onwards, you had emerging factions within the ANC, where you had people who felt that the president, the former president at this point, was being targeted by the party and targeted by people in civil society and other spheres of business and so on. And so you have a lot of protection of Jacob Zuma and a lot of support for Jacob Zuma, not only in the ANC, but also in the community around him, in the province that he's from. But on the other hand, you also have a lot of people who, number one, supported the removal of Jacob Zuma as president a few years ago, and people who believe that this kind of verdict does show that politicians can be held to account, particularly in a country where we're dealing with large-scale corruption issues like the state capture inquiry at the moment, and where we're seeing politician after politician being outed for being involved in some kind of corrupt activity. This does give some sense that the law is working as it should. The question is our politics ready to deal with the weight of the law?
All right, Tessa, this is quite landmark one. You just pointed out that he's got lots of support in South Africa. People are saying, you know, this perhaps a witch hunt politically, but he's not getting jail term for the crimes he's been accused of: state capture, corruption, fraud. He's getting sentenced for contempt of court for not showing up for the crimes he's been accused of. So walk us through the other process, which is the case itself against Jacob Zuma, because this is basically 15 months. But what about the case about corruption against him, which is still ongoing, as it were?
Well, actually, the case that is currently before the court is a case that's not about his term as president, which is what the state capture inquiry is about. It's actually a case that dates back to the early 2000s and the arms deal, where an associate of his, Shabir Sheikh, was already found guilty many years ago of corrupt activities that involved the then deputy president, Jacob Zuma. He was at that point removed as deputy president by Thabo Mbeki, who was president at the time. And because his associate was found guilty of corruption that involved him, there was, of course, always this pending set of allegations and charges against him for those corrupt activities almost 20 years ago. And so this case that he is in front of court for is actually a long-standing one. But what we are seeing today is not actually linked to any corruption case. It is linked to the state capture inquiry, which is not a legal court of law. It is a judicial inquiry that's led by a judge, but it does not have, at that point, it would not have legal implications for him appearing. Whatever he said, they would not be necessarily directly about whether he would go to jail or not. We are a few steps away from that in terms of the state capture and the Gupta allegations. But this is actually a first time that he's been held accountable before a court of law for anything, corruption related or not. And I think that's what's important here, that politicians, whether their crimes are big or small, can be held accountable.
Right. Now, looking at this is the first of its kind, like we've said, and South Africa has joined some other African countries, Nigeria exclusive, to have actually imprisoned or sentenced the former president to jail, countries like Sudan and even Algeria. But looking at it on the flip side, can we call this victory for democracy, or is it even too soon to tell?
I think it is a little bit too soon to tell for two reasons. One is that we don't know whether or not the former president is actually going to comply and willingly go in the next 4 days now and submit himself to the law. If he does not, we do know that there are a lot of people who already, especially within the ANC, what we call the MK Veterans League within the ANC, who are saying that they are willing to make sure that the president does not end up in jail and does not submit himself to the law. And I think that could be particularly dangerous and testing for our democracy, because we will see citizens putting themselves on the line for a political matter against the law. And I think that could be a dangerous moment. If the president does go through with it and he does submit himself to the law, that will be a win for democracy. We must also remember that that 15 months could be as short as 2.5 months, because in South African law, you would be eligible for parole about a sixth into your prison term. So that would be about 2.5 months actually in prison if he is given parole. So there would also be questions about, is he going to be given any special treatment? Will that parole become perhaps a medical parole based on his age? And I think those kinds of things are going to be in the public discourse, and people are going to be evaluating our democracy and whether or not this idea that we are all equal before the law is actually going to play itself out all the way through, or this judgment is going to be a momentary win, and then we're just going to see the political elite do what they do and evade the full consequences of the law.
All right, thank you so much, Tessa Dooms, for giving us a bit of a breakdown. So we'll have to watch in the coming days to see if there will be compliance from Zuma, but history doesn't really say so in that sense. Thank you very much, Tessa Dooms, once again for coming on Breakfast Central.